Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here to give you my review of the newest Laowa lens, the Argus 25mm F0.95 APO lens for various APS-C mirrorless camera mounts like Sony E, Nikon Z, Canon RF and EF-M, and Fuji X. Today I'll be giving you a quick review and summary, but you can get my detailed image quality breakdown at the end of the video, or get that information by checking out my text review that is linked in the description. Today's episode is brought to you by Phantom Wallet, the minimalist modern wallet that is now even better with the new Phantom X that is crafted from aluminum right here in Canada. It is 22% smaller and 35% lighter, while still making it easy to access your cards and money when you need them, thanks to their unique fanning mechanism. You could even customize your wallet due to its modular design, with accessories like a money clip, cash holder, ID display, and even Chipolo and AirTag tracking integration. Visit store.phantomwallet.com to check out their unique sizes, styles, and finishes that span from aluminum to wood to carbon fiber, and use code DUSTIN15 for 15% off when you're ready to check out. The Argus lineup is a premium line of extremely large aperture manual focus lenses from Laowa. Each of them has had an extreme aperture of f0.95, which is a full 1 1/6 stop faster than f1.4. I took this image at ISO 1600 and a shutter speed of 1 1/60th, for example, and I would have to shoot at ISO 12800 to get a similar exposure with an f2.8 zoom lens. That's the value of such a wide aperture prime like this. The Argus 25 is designed for the smaller APS-C sensor, but it is still a fairly large lens. It is 71.5 millimeters in diameter, which leaves a 62 millimeter front filter thread, and 81 millimeters in length. That's 2.81 inches by 3.18 inches. It weighs in at 575 grams or 20.28 ounces due to Laowa's typical heavy-duty all-metal lens construction. The focus ring is made of rib metal and moves smoothly and precisely along its near 160 degrees of rotation. The weight is just about perfect, giving you plenty of feel and precision in the focus process. The aperture ring gives you the choice of having standard clicks, or you can declick it for a smooth rotation throughout the aperture values. There are 9 aperture blades, and they do a reasonable but not exceptional job of retaining a circular shape as you stop the lens down. This is a fully manual lens with no other switches or controls, no weather sealing, and no electronics. Fortunately, you can still get things like focus overlays in your camera to help with focus, and even image stabilization if your camera is so equipped. You just need to manually enter the focal length. The lens hood here is very unique, as it is rectangular rather than round, leaving a unique leather-patterned front lens cap that is rectangular as well. The build quality is very high, and the Argus 25 carries a price tag of $549 US. It was an interesting choice to marry this huge maximum aperture with an APO or apochromatic design. This makes for a unique performance for the Argus 25, as an APO design results in lower chromatic aberrations, which produces more contrast at wide apertures, but it also tends to produce more contrast in the defocused area as well, making bokeh a little busier, which does reduce one of the main strengths of a lens like this. There is a minimal amount of barrel distortion and a much greater amount of vignette. The vignette will definitely need correcting in some situations. I saw minimal longitudinal chromatic aberration, but did see some lateral chromatic aberration along the edges of the frame. The lens is quite sharp and contrasty in the center of the frame, even at f0.95. There is some drop to the midframe and then to the corners, but that sweet spot of sharpness allows you to have quite good contrast results on real-world images, even at f0.95. The midframe sharpens nicely by f2, and the corners are very sharp by f4. At landscape apertures of f5.6 to f11, which is minimum aperture here, the lens is extremely crisp, producing strongly detailed images. I also find that Laowa colors are better in their APO designs as well. The downside, as noted, is that the bokeh is a little busier than what I would like. There are some outlining and harder edges in the regions that should be soft. Flare resistance isn't bad for a lens with such a large maximum aperture, though you will lose some contrast at wide apertures when the sun is in or right out of the frame. Coma performance is not great, with stars near the edge of the frame looking like a flock of birds flying out of the image. Stopping down a bit makes the birds smaller, but doesn't eliminate the coma smear altogether. In summation, the Laowa Argus 25mm f0.95 APO lens is both similar and different to the Argus 35mm f0.95 full-frame lens that I reviewed earlier. The APO design does alter the formula, which results in more usable sharpness results at huge apertures like f0.95. It also means that the bokeh isn't quite as soft, however, which may turn off some of the core audience that is interested in a more dreamy look in a lens like this. These are all matters of preference, however, and what is definite is that there is always room for more premium prime lenses on APS-C, a space that often gets overlooked. This is a serious lens, and it is interesting to see Laowa bring some of their APO experience that they've developed in their macro lens designs into a more extreme lens like this. You'll have to decide for yourself whether or not the end result is something you're looking for. But I will say this, the list of f0.95 lenses with an apochromatic design and a price tag of under $550 is a very short one. Stay tuned for a detailed image quality breakdown right after this, or you can check out the text review that is linked in the description. There's also buying links there and linkage to follow myself or Craig on social media, to become a patron, or to purchase channel merchandise. Please like and subscribe as well. Thanks for watching, have a great day, and let the light in. So we'll start our image quality breakdown with a look at vignette and distortion, which typically reveals both a Laowa strength and a Laowa weakness. Laowa does really good when it comes to controlling distortion most of the time, and that's true here. You can see just a minimum amount of barrel distortion, but it's very linear in nature, so it corrects very, very cleanly, so no real issue there. Vignette, however, tends to be a Laowa weakness, and that's true here also. We can see a very heavy amount of vignette present. This being a brand new lens, there are no correction profiles available yet in software, and there won't be any in camera because it has no electronic contacts. But what you can see here is I've got a very minimal amount of barrel distortion correction at +3, but a significant amount, almost a maximizing of the vignette slider. One other thing that I will point out while we're here, and that is that this lens does suffer with a bit of lateral chromatic aberration, and if we go into 200%, you can see that there is some fringing there at the edges of the frame that is going to show up. Now, the apochromatic design also means that there is minimal amount of longitudinal chromatic aberration, and so you can see very minimal fringing before the plane of focus, and then just a little bit more prominent green fringing after the plane of focus, but this is at a 200% magnification, and so, you know, under normal circumstances, I've already cropped this in a bit, you're not even going to see much of anything there. So, for example, in this real-world image of the stove, lots of shiny surfaces there, and so this would be a place where very often you would see a lot of longitudinal chromatic aberration as you start to move, you know, out of the plane of focus there. We can see that everything is nicely neutral and all of these shiny surfaces with very, very little fringing to see, and so that's evidence of that apochromatic design. Likewise, in this image, it allows you to get some pop to images that you wouldn't normally get at f0.95. And so, you know, in these chess pieces, if you have longitudinal chromatic aberrations, they're going to show up in some of these out of focus areas and then along some of the edges of the pieces. But we can see that we have a nice clean end product and thus a little bit more pop than what you might expect from a lens with this large of a maximum aperture. So let's take a look at our resolution and contrast. Again, a quick caveat here, and that is that I kind of unknowingly signed up for getting a Canon RF loaner of this lens, thinking that initially that it was actually a full frame rather than an APS-C lens. So I'm having to use, because I don't own a Canon RF APS-C body, I'm having to use the lens in the R5's APS-C mode. So it's not a ton of resolution, about 17 megapixels, enough to, to see our end results, but obviously not as high as something like the R7, and it's 32.5 megapixels. So taking a look at a 200% magnification in the center of the frame, we can see that, as the MTF charts suggest, as you can see here, that the center of the frame is actually quite good. Good contrast, good detail there. So we move off towards the mid-frame. It's a pretty good result, but not exceptional at f0.95. Certainly still very usable, all in this zone. And then if we pop down into the extreme corner, we can see that it's not terrible. There still is usable image quality there, but it's not exceptionally sharp down there in the corner. Now, it is enough resolution to work even in a landscape type setting, at least across part of the frame. So we can see here in the center of the frame that, the geese being kind of the main area of focus, and then the grasses of the marsh kind of before them. Everything looks nice and crisp there, and then into the distance. If we look over here towards the side, we can see that, it starts to get softer towards the edge. You can also see some of those lateral chromatic aberrations moving off to the other side, trying to keep in that plane of focus, but you can see that it's just a softer result as you get towards the edge of the frame. So just for curiosity's sake, if you want to see compared to a typical stop down like f5.6, you can see that there's definitely more contrast and detail, but what you're mostly going to notice is that as you move off towards the edge of the frame, there is a much more significant amount of detail, to where this is kind of, almost watercolor brush strokes. It's, crisp photorealism at the f5.6 aperture. Now, for the way that you will often use a lens like this, there is obviously much more punch because of the apochromatic design. You can see that even again at f0.95, lots of good detail there. Another shot here, you can see that it's somewhere around that f0.95 or right after. You can see there's lots of detail, very crisp end result there. And then looking towards a diffused background. More on the bokeh quality in just a moment. So a mild stop down to around f1.2, you can see produces a higher contrast result in the center of the frame. As we move off here towards the mid frame, the improvement is less dramatic looking. And if we kind of scroll down here to the edge of the frame, again, you're getting a little bit better contrast. Everything is a little bit, there's more difference between the bright area and the dark area, but we're not really seeing a big uptick in resolution yet. And that's true on down to I believe f1.4. If we go on to f2, we're starting to see a improvement there. And if we come back up here looking at like a mid-frame result, we can see that the mid-frame is now showing much improved contrast. Sir Winston down here is looking much crisper, and even the Queen here over on the left side. You can see it's still not amazing there towards the corner, but it is improving. Now by f2.8, we're starting to get crisp results right off into the corner. And if we stop on down to f4, you can see we now have a really strong result in either corner. So what that means is if you're shooting at more landscape apertures, as we have already seen, you're going to get really crisp results across the frame. There's lots of resolution there, and we can look up to the very top. We can pan on down. And everywhere that you look in this frame, there's just great detail, good contrast, good color rendition. So it gives you a nice amount of pop at landscape apertures. Now, unlike many lenses, because the maximum aperture is so big, the minimum aperture is correspondingly not all that small. It's f11. And so as a byproduct, diffraction is much less of an issue with this lens. So you can shoot all the way to its smallest apertures without any kind of real penalty. And in fact, usually when I compare wide open aperture and minimum aperture, I see the maximum aperture looks much better. That's not true here, particularly off in the corner where the maximum aperture looks really quite sharp in the corners. Now, in a lens like this, the maximum magnification is not particularly high. You can only focus as closely as 34 centimeters, and so as a byproduct, we have like a 0.10 type magnification, and you can see that the lens isn't particularly compelling, at least wide open up front. So there's a kind of a very small sweet spot of sharpness. You can see where it's focused, but flat plane, it's not a particularly flat plane of focus, particularly at f0.95, and so the sharpness starts to fall off. Now, what I did find is that we do have a good three-dimensional pop if you shoot at certain distances. So like these branches here really stand out nicely against the background. But the downside that I discovered and I suspected with an apochromatic lens and a design like this is that while it does obviously improve your contrast and resolution at very wide apertures, it also means that the bokeh isn't as soft and creamy as what you're going to find in the other Argus images or lenses. And so here, like the other Argus lenses would probably show you more chromatic aberrations here, but also give you a more diffused background. And, for example, here we can see that we've got good contrast and detail on our subject. But if we look towards the background, there's much more outlining. It's just busier in general, and that is in part due to the apochromatic design. Again, here we can just see that, and again, bokeh is subjective, so I'll let you choose for yourself. I find, though, that there's a little bit of a drop-off in the bokeh quality. You can see that here, but also we can see that at very wide apertures with the sun right out of the frame, there is a little bit of veiling. Ghosting is not bad. I see only a little bit of a ghosting ghosting artifact, but you can see we've lost some contrast in this image. However, shooting right into the sun at smaller apertures, I really thought that this lens held up really well. We've got a small ghosting artifact, and even in all of these reflections here on the water surface, we really don't see hardly anything negative there. And likewise here, a little bit different angle of the sun. We just got some very, very minor ghosting artifacts, very, very bright evening sun, but everything looks quite good here. Now for our final test, we'll take a look at how it does for astrophotography. Obviously, this can suck in a massive, massive amount of light, but unfortunately, it's an imperfect result when it comes to astro. For one thing, you can see that there is some fringing that shows up on star points that are, very bright, but as you move towards the edge of the frame, you can see either the host of angels or a flock of birds that is exiting the scene, and what that is, of course, is coma showing up, and so on bright star points near the edge of the frame, they're really going to grow wings and fly. And that's not what you're looking for in an image like this. So stopping down a bit, as I've done here on the right, you can see that the size of the bird starts to shrink. Maybe they're pigeons now and instead of geese, but it is still there and it's reduced, but that chromatic effect is still taking place. And so unfortunately, not a perfect result when it comes to astrophotography. Overall, however, this is an intriguing and slightly different approach to the optical formula for a lens like this, and either you're going to love it or hate it, depending on what your priorities are.